Yo, what is up guys, your boy IzuKage here with the movie for What If Deku Could Bloodbend. Before we start, I just want to say there will be a community tab post up right after I drop this video, so if you guys had any questions you wanted to ask me, well, now's your chance. And with that said, I hope you guys going to enjoy the What If. So we're gonna start off with Deku being born. Deku has had a happy, ordinary life and he's acting like every other kid, and his childhood was filled with happiness. He made friends like Bakugo, but one remarkable thing about Izuku was he was always a smart kid. Inko knew this wasn't a quirk since she would often see Izuku reading books and gaining knowledge over time. But when Izuku turned 4, that day at school, people in his class started to manifest their quirks. The first of which is Bakugo. He had an explosion quirk and everyone was excited and praised Bakugo. The teacher said he would definitely be in line for the #1 hero spot. And as time went on, more and more people gained their quirks except Izuku. 2 weeks after Bakugo got his quirk, Inko got worried Izuku would never manifest a quirk, and she took him to the quirk doctor to see if he even had a chance to get one. While there, Izuku was waiting around with his mom for his results when they called him in. The doctor sat the two down and went on to explain. So, Miss Midoriya, you said you were curious about young Izuku here and if he would develop a quirk. Inko nodded and the doctor continued. Well, fortunately, the x-rays indicate that he does have but a single joint in his pinky toe. And he goes on to explain that this means that only people with quirks have this single joint in their pinky toe. And Inko breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Izuku, who was confused of what the doctor was saying. But he saw how happy his mom was, so it must have meant good news. So the doctor explained that he's not sure why he hasn't developed his quirk yet, but most do at his age, but she does advise Inko to just wait it out and see if he ever shows any signs of a quirk. So Inko thanks the doctor and leaves with Izuku, and he's playing with his action figures in the back of the car. So when they get home, Inko puts on some water to boil for tea and sits Izuku down at the table. While Inko was waiting for the water to boil, she was just using her phone, not paying attention to anything like her surroundings. And while Inko was filling up the kettle, she poured it too much, it was basically at the top. So when the water came to a boil, a jet stream of boiling hot water was sent directly to Inko's face. She was too slow to dodge, but Izuku, watching this entire thing unfold, was scared and he opened his palm towards the water and shut his eyes in fear. He expected his mom to scream out in pain, but when he opened his eyes, the water was suspended in mid-air. Inko looked at the water, then to Izuku, then back to the water, then to Izuku again, and ran towards him. She hugged Izuku and started throwing him up in the air, and she's saying over and over, "You have a quirk, Izuku, you finally have a quirk," and she's just excited, and Izuku is excited as well. But he said, "Mom, what about the water?" Inko froze and she looked back, and there was just more water spewing out of the kettle, covering the floor with boiling water. And after half an hour, the kitchen was finally cleaned. So that day, they went back to the doctor's office and had Izuku's quirk registered. The doctor asked him what he would like his quirk name to be, and Izuku actually thought of the best name on the car ride over. He said it's... Now this is where you guys comment a good name for his quirk, but for now, I'll just call it Flo. So yeah, leave those suggestions for the quirk name in the comments. So at school the next day, Izuku was excited to tell all his friends about his new quirk. First, Kachan. Before class started, Izuku went over to his desk and said, "Hey, Kachan, I finally got my quirk." And he replied, he's like, "Really? What is it, Izuku?" "Well, I mean, either ways, it won't be as strong as mine." and Izuku held the slightest bit of envy for Bakugo's quirk, but he was determined to prove he was strong as well. So Izuku reached into his backpack and took out a water bottle. He poured it all over Bakugo's table, and Bakugo said, like, "What are you doing, Izuku?" Like, he's pouring water all over his table. But he didn't respond because, he had to focus hard because this took mental strain. That's sort of the drawback of the quirk, I would say. So before the water started spilling over the edges of the table, Izuku took a deep breath, and with a lot of focus, he used his hand to gather the water into a pool. And now people from around the class were starting to make a circle around Bakugo's table, wanting to see. And Izuku then raised his hands up and the water began to follow, lifting off the table into a water ball. Everyone was impressed, but Bakugo, seeing all their amazed faces, was angry. Izuku was taking all his attention and Bakugo wasn't having it. He slapped Izuku's hand away and the water ball fell, and he then stood up out of his desk and said, "I don't care if you can move water around, you'll always be weaker than me." And with a quirk, Izuku knew he could eventually match up to Bakugo, so he stood his ground. Bakugo walked towards Izuku, who knew he couldn't take him right now, so he started backing up. But as he walked closer to Izuku, he stepped right into the pool of water from the water ball like he just spilled. And Bakugo slipped and fell, and the entire class started laughing. Bakugo was just embarrassed, but he was getting more angry. He got up and saw all the people laughing in his face, even some of his close friends. He was ready to charge Izuku, but the teacher walked in and said, settle down, everyone take your seats." And everyone knows this teacher doesn't mess around, so they quickly do, and the class went on like normal. The entire day, Izuku dodges any and all interaction with Bakugo, and now at all costs, and he makes it to the end of the day and just books it home. Izuku went straight to his room to cool off because the adrenaline was still coursing through his system. When he settled down, Izuku was thinking of ways to make his quirk stronger because the way it is now, he won't be able to take on Bakugo, even some of the people in his class with weaker quirks. And since it was Friday, Izuku could stay up later than usual, and he used this time to go on the family computer and search up anything that had water in it. His thought process because of this is that if he could control water, that means he could control anything with the molecular structure H2O in it. So he took notes of everything he saw online, and the next day he started experimenting with these ideas. First was a change in state. Could he control water in its different forms, solid, liquid, and gas? While he's doing his experiments, Izuku found that the mental strain was too much, and he had to take a lot of breaks in between these quote-unquote training sessions. But by the end of the day, Izuku confirmed some of his ideas. He could control ice and water vapor. So the next day, Izuku did more wacky ideas, juice, milk, just any type of liquid around the house. And Izuku just crossed almost everything off his list except one thing: blood. Izuku didn't know where to find it. He was too scared to cut himself, to get his own blood, and asking his mom for blood was a pretty weird question, so he kept that one for later. So for the years between kindergarten, elementary, and middle school, Izuku and Bakugo would have many altercations, but Izuku would come out on top with all of them. He would just end it before it even began. He would use water to stop him from making explosions. Water actually doesn't stop nitroglycerin explosions, but because Bakugo wasn't able to make any decent sized one, Izuku got away with it, to be able to use his water to stop it. Also, during this time, Izuku trained to be able to change the form of water. Before, he could control ice and water vapor, but now he can change it, so he could be using water for 1 second, then he could turn it into gas, then turn it into a solid. You get me? Like that. So we're at the last day of middle school, and the teacher comes into class. He says, Well, students, I have your job apprehension tests right here. I would hand these out, but I know you all want to be heroes. And he throws the papers up, and everyone in the class starts cheering and showing off their quirks. One kid is over there pulling out his eyeballs out of his sockets, and another kid is over there, I don't know, has some stretchy neck. We call him Giraffe, don't ask. And of course, with these quirks, the students are looking to be top 10 heroes themselves.
Damn, bro, you got the whole squad laughing.
Okay, let's be real. These guys will be lucky to be a Chili's employee. Anyways, the teacher tells everyone to chill out and says, okay, look, here I see 2 students actually apply to UA. And immediately Bakugo stands up and says, yeah, of course, I'm the only one getting into UA. All you other losers would be lucky to be a sidekick. And everyone felt that diss. Because, I mean, is he wrong though? But the teacher said, that's enough, Katsuki. With that attitude, I doubt they'll accept you anywhere. But Izuku here is a model student. He has never gotten into any trouble that you didn't provoke. And he has straight A's in all his subjects, and his quirk is really something else. Bakugo just crossed his arms and just sat back down and said, whatever. And after the bell rings, everyone gets let out. Izuku is pretty excited to get home today because last week he asked his mom if they could get a dog, and she agreed. She was planning to get it for his last day of school, so he quickly hurried home, and taking a shortcut down this alleyway, Izuku saw a manhole cover fly out, and from the sewers rose the sludge villain. This thing turned to Izuku and said, "You look strong enough. Give me your body, kid." And the sludge villain rushed towards Deku, but he ran into his worst possible matchup, a water manipulator, and he's made up of slime. Izuku extended his arms and the sludge villain stopped moving. Izuku started bending his hands and fingers in all sorts of ways, and the sludge villain was held down. Then, from the distance, a voice was heard.
I am here.
All Might landed next to the sludge villain and he said, "Aha, I finally found you. You're a slippery one, aren't you?" And he then realized he wasn't moving or talking. All Might turned around and saw Izuku, and he saw how he could control the sludge villain's movements and said, "That's a pretty neat quirk, kid. Now, time for me to take this villain in." And All Might bottled the sludge villain whilst it was immobilized and thanked Izuku, then was on his way. Izuku did make a fuss about just meeting All Might, yes, he's still a fan, but not as much as canon, and he's really excited to get his dog today. So Izuku runs home, and once he gets there, he goes up to his mom and says, "So, where is it?" And Izuku and Inko looked confused and asked, "What are you talking about?" And Izuku hearing this felt devastated. He was so excited, yet his mom didn't even remember. And, he kind of felt a bit down and he just said, "Never mind." And he went up to his room, and when he opened the door, an animal rushed out and jumped onto him. Izuku fell back and the dog started licking him, and he didn't know what to think, but he heard his mom's laughter in the distance, so he put 2 and 2 together. So Izuku had lots of fun with his dog for a week, but he had to start getting serious with his training. Izuku went on the computer to see if there was any type of space he could train in, and there he saw this beach nearby, Dagobah Beach, and it looked beautiful. It was clear, like the perfect place to train. So Izuku set out to go there the next day. So while he was choosing the clothes to wear to train in, Izuku came across his notebook from when he was younger, and he smiled remembering the good old days, and he flipped through, and then he came to a page on blood manipulation. Izuku was curious and read it, and it was talking about how his quirk could be used to manipulate blood. He just needed someone or something to test it on. Then out of the corner out of his eye, Izuku saw his dog walking around. This gave him an idea. Quick disclaimer, this is just a story, so don't get upset with what's about to happen, okay? It's necessary. So in the night while Inko was at bed, Izuku brought the dog up to his room. Also, I'm not giving the dog a name because that's how you form attachments. Anyways, Izuku tries this, like the blood manipulation and moving the blood in the dog's body, but it didn't seem to work. Then he remembered how he would control the sludge villain and just acting like you're moving the blood to the part of the body you want it to move. So he focused and lifted both his hands, and the dog stood up straight. Its legs were frozen and unable to move, and Izuku felt like it felt weird to control another thing. He knew it was possible, but still. He started moving the dog around in mid-air, just all over the room. So for the first month, Izuku trained this way with his blood bending. Like this, then he wanted to try the blood itself, so he ordered a gallon of animal blood online from Amaron. He of course had to hide it from Inko. That would be just a weird conversation in general. Okay, Izuku, we need to talk about your animal blood fetish. But yeah, with the blood itself, Izuku realized that he could use it to form weapons he liked, like swords was the most common thing he would use, as well as shurikens as well, but just any form of small projectiles. So trying to see how effective they are, Izuku would go to the beach he searched up a few days ago. When he arrived, it was nothing like the pictures online. It was completely trashed. There were washing machines, t-shirts, just everything imaginable. Izuku was thinking of finding some place different, but he looked over it all and just decided to turn a bad situation into something good. He started using the trash to test his weapons and see how sharp they were and what they couldn't cut through. Just pushing everything to its limits to know what he could work on throughout the 9 months training period. So it went something like this. The first week, Izuku did continuous tests with his weapons and narrowing down his selection to only 3 main weapons, because there are thousands of weapons if you really think about it, and having to choose between all of these would be almost impossible. So he stuck with a sword, senbon, those tiny needles, and he could make them bigger or smaller depending on what he needs to penetrate, and a shield. So over the months, Izuku would develop a sort of suit where throughout the suit there were secret stores of blood that he could use whenever. 5 months left, Izuku worked on more resourceful ways to use his blood, like intimidation, which can throw someone off their game. Imagine walking through a hall and the ceiling started leaking blood. That would be creepy. He also comes up with other ways to use the blood, but I'll get into that in future parts. Or, you could leave an idea in the comments. It is always appreciated. So for the rest of the time, Izuku masters his blood manipulation with his dog, of course. Yes, I know animal cruelty, but it's in the pursuit of science, so it's okay. Anyways, the 9 months go by in a flash and Izuku is standing outside of UA ready to start his hero journey. And that is where I'm going to be leaving this one off. Okay, I'm joking. Come on, look at the length of the video. You have a good 5 or 10 minutes left. So yeah, Izuku walks up to the gates and immediately he sees the hot-headed, loudmouth Bakugo. While he's walking past, he shoulder checks him and Bakugo gets knocked over, but he manages to catch himself. He looks up and sees this guy walking off and he says, "Hey, watch where you're going." And Izuku turns around and said, "Oh, sorry, didn't see you there," and walks into the building. Bakugo was shocked. Over these 9 months, he didn't even recognize Izuku. He had changed drastically. The first thing was his height. Izuku is on par, if not a bit taller than Ida, and since he's been training every day, even some days harder than he did in canon, he had a lot of muscle definition. So Bakugo follows behind Izuku, and first was the written test. The pass mark was 80%, so those who failed were just sent home. Of course, Izuku with his 10,000 IQ gets almost a perfect score, and some of the questions only pro heroes would know, and Izuku got them right. And he knows his score because this isn't like a paper exam. Come on, this is UA. They got computers for everyone. So the exam gets marked as you finish. So Nezu sees all the results coming up, and there's a basic trend. Most people fall between 92 and 80%, with 3 outliers: Izuku, Ida, and Momo. And this caught his attention, so he'll be focusing on these 3 as the exam goes on. So Izuku and the people who pass head to the auditorium, where President Mike starts explaining the practical portion. Bakugo found himself next to Izuku and wondering, how the hell did this water boy look so, he hates to admit it, but so cool? Just looking at him pisses him off. So as President Mike was about to finish his speech, Ida stood up and spoke. "Pardon my interruption. You seem to be forgetting something important." President Mike asked, "What are you talking about, kid?" And Ida opened a little pamphlet they all got and turned to the page with the 0 pointer. He says, "It says here that there are 4 robots, not 3. And President Mike said, "Well, kid, I was about to..." But Ida interrupts him again. He said, "If this is a mistake on UA's part, this is very unprofessional and not expected from the top school for heroes." And when he could finally speak, President Mike said, "Yes, I know, I was getting to that if you didn't interrupt me, so it would be kindly appreciated if you had a seat and wait. Now because of your impatience, there will be twice as many robots in the mock city." And everyone started booing Ida and telling him to sit down and not to ruin their chances. But actually, President Mike was just saying this. He can't control anything in the mock city. He just wanted people to be angry at Ida. So he finally finished his explanation and then assigns everyone to their mock city. Izuku was assigned to Gate B along with a few familiar faces like Ida and Uraraka, who Izuku saw was really tense and stressed out while she was waiting for a go signal. He didn't know her, but she looked like she could use some support. He was walking up to her when the eagle-eyed Ida saw what was about to happen, and he wouldn't allow it. He rushed in front of Izuku and said, "Hey, what do you think you're about to do?" And Izuku raised an eyebrow and said, "What?" And Ida said, "Don't play dumb with me. You were about to sabotage that girl's chances of getting into UA, weren't you?" And Izuku said, "Bro, I was just about to talk to her." But the further Izuku got with the conversation, he just got more annoyed by Ida, and people started gathering around. So Izuku used blood bending. Without any hand motions, Ida stopped talking and just stood there frozen, unable to move. His eyes were darting around confused, but he couldn't talk, and Izuku had, practiced blood bending so much that Avatar's version is comical. Instead of using it now and then, Izuku took the time to master it and be on par with his water manipulation. So Izuku walked past Ida, but before he could talk to Uraraka, President Mike came over the comms and he said, "What are you waiting for? There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go!" Everyone rushed out of the gate, and when Izuku left, Ida was finally able to move and he ran in as well. Izuku turned down one of the streets and he was confronted with 2 one-pointer robots, and they drove full speed at Izuku. He reached into his pockets and pulled out a vial of blood. The heroes watching from the observation room were wondering what he was going to do with this, but more importantly, where did he get blood? Izuku then took it and threw it at one of the robots, and with the blood covering it, he used it to crush it. And the same for the next one-pointer. So after he was finished, he gathered up all the blood and made a platform with it that he could use to fly around. Izuku went around and used more of these vials to cut through the robots, their thick metals, or just crush them straight up. Izuku, being able to fly, could do this easily and racked up a high amount of points. So fast forward a bit and things are going well. Izuku was about to get ready to stop, but after destroying a 3-pointer, Izuku heard screams coming from all around. He was up in the sky, so when he looked down, he saw people running away towards the gate. Izuku was wondering what was wrong, and He started looking around, then he saw the huge zero-pointer walking towards the gate. Izuku crouched down and held onto the platform and flew quickly over to the robot because if he was just standing up, he would just fly off. So Izuku gets close to the zero-pointer, but before he could do anything, he hears a scream from below him. He looks down and a girl is trapped under some rubble. Izuku goes down to her, and this is Uraraka. She screams for Izuku to save her, and he uses the collection of blood he has to force the rubble off her. He turns around and the zero-pointer is almost there, so Izuku puts Uraraka onto his blood platform, and as he's about to send her off, she says, "But what about you?" Izuku just tells her not to worry, and he sends her off. The zero-pointer is right in front of Izuku, and it uses a laser and shoots it at him, but he manages to dodge. But this was a part of his plan to take it down. The laser broke through the ground and burst a pipe that was carrying water. Izuku, now with this almost endless amount of water, drained it all out and made a huge wall of it, and had it crash down on the zero-pointer like a tsunami wave, then froze it. With the shards piercing through the robot, it was completely taken down for good. The heroes in the observation room were amazed. Aizawa said, "Vlad King, he seems to have some blood-related quirk like yours, but with water abilities?" Aizawa was confused, but Vlad King agreed and stared at Izuku, and through the screen he was wondering if it might be... No, it can't be. Vlad King just walked out of the room, holding his head like he just remembered something. All Might and Nezu's eyes were glued to the screen, and Nezu said to All Might, "You think he's the one?" And All Might didn't respond, but just thought about it. Flashback to 9 months ago, All Might was at UA to look for a potential successor to One for All. Nezu showed All Might UA's elite students, the Big Three. All Might was impressed by them, but he didn't want to make a decision too quickly. And he wanted a hero with heart, but a hero that was willing to do what must be done. And All Might is thinking back to his encounter with All for One, where he had to take him down. And he also thinks All Might is, All for One is still dead, by the way. So All Might tells Nezu that he's impressed, but he doesn't want to make a decision too quickly, and Nezu understands and offers All Might a position as a teacher here, and he could assess some of the newer students coming in. All Might thought this was a great idea and agreed. So back to the present. Nezu asked All Might if he thought Izuku was the one to inherit his quirk, but All Might said he would have to see a bit more of his personality as time goes on. So back with Izuku, he goes to the gate to check on Uraraka, and she was already gone to recover girl, but the people there were praising Izuku for being able to take down the zero-pointer and asking him all sorts of questions, mostly about his quirk. Meanwhile, Bakugo, who finished his exam, he was walking home, and he passed Izuku's gate, and he sees people crowding around him, and he gives a smug and says serves him right, because he thinks the people are arguing with him because he messed up somehow. And he walked home satisfied like, yeah, that damn right, you freaking Deku. So Izuku, on the other hand, started deflecting all these questions and managed to get out of there alive. He walked home, and as soon as he came through the doors, Inko had even more questions for him. She was like, "How was it? How did it go? Do you want something to eat? Are you tired?" All these questions, Izuku was just over it. He gave her simple yeses and nos and went to his room. Izuku leaned against his door and fell onto the floor completely exhausted. It was his first time using bloodbending to fly, and that giant ice spike he used to take down the zero-pointer was just adding to the strain. And Izuku laid on his ground and eventually fell asleep for hours until the next day. Okay, so we start the day Izuku receives his letter from UA. Inko comes in the house freaking out. She says, "Izuku, it's finally here!" And Izuku, who's just chilling in his room, comes downstairs and sees Inko geeking out like a little girl. And she shows him the letter and they sit down to open it. He opens it slowly, building up the tension. When he opened it, a small round disc falls onto the table, then a hologram of All Might appears.
Izuku Midoriya, quirk name, Flow. Young man, I have to say, in the exams you were amazing, both intellectually and physically, scoring higher than people with intelligence quirks. And in the practicals, got an impressive score of 450 points. It's my pleasure to welcome you to your Hero Academia.
The hologram disappears, and there was silence before Inko bear hugged Izuku and she was cheering, and they were basically having fun for him passing. And later that day, she brought Izuku out to a pretty nice restaurant, and they had whatever your favorite food is, just say that. So during the week before UA, Inko was feeling really motivated by Izuku's success, so she wanted to better herself. She started jogging early in the morning and actually training her quirk so she could defend herself. In this, Inko is the same body type as Kanon, but she's working to improve herself. So fast forward to Izuku's official first day at UA. Izuku hops out of his bed, actually excited to go to school, to meet new people, but most importantly, work hard to eventually become number one. Izuku takes a nice shower, and quick something to mention, while he was looking in the bathroom mirror, Izuku saw that he had some white hair, not because of stress or anything like that, just his hair is white. He was wondering what that might be, but doesn't think too much about it and puts on his UA uniform. He goes downstairs and Inko is just finishing making breakfast. She made some eggs, pancakes, the whole thing. And fun fact, I've actually never eaten pancakes, but besides the point. Izuku quickly eats his food and was on his way out the door when Inko called him back and said, "You're in too much of a hurry, you forgot something." And Izuku was confused cause he swore he packed everything he needed last night. And Inko said this and kissed him on the cheek. Izuku freaked out and said, "Mom, I'm too old for that." And Inko said, "Whatever you say, I love you, Izuku." And Izuku turned around and just whispered, "I love you too," and jogged all the way to school. When Izuku was in the building, he was overwhelmed from all the passages and doors. He was trying to search for his class when someone tapped on his shoulder. Izuku was he was frightened by this sudden touch and turned around ready to fight. And this girl with long blue hair was startled too by him suddenly turning around. Izuku apologized, but she said it was alright and said, "I saw you looking a bit lost, and what room are you trying to find?" And Izuku was a bit embarrassed, but he had to admit it. He said he was looking for class 1A. And she responded, "Oh, that's not far from here. I could just walk you there." Izuku said, "Are you sure? I don't want to inconvenience you." And she said, "It's alright." So they both walked towards class 1A. And on the walk there, she said, "So, my name's Nejire Hado. What's yours?" Izuku said, "It's Izuku Midoriya." And by time he said that, they were at the class. So they said their goodbyes, and Nejire said, "I hope we see each other again," and waves goodbye while smiling. Izuku froze a bit in that moment because she was probably the most beautiful person he's ever seen, losing himself in her smile, but the moment was ruined. A guy with red hair said, "Yo dude, you're blocking the door." And Izuku snapped back to reality and said, "Oh, sorry, and he said it's cool, and they walk in together. First impressions of the class for Izuku were pretty mixed. He sees a lot of interesting characters, some floating gloves, a guy with grapes on his head, and someone with a tail. But in a stroke of bad luck, Izuku saw the person he least wanted to be in the class with, Bakugo. He was arguing with Ida, but because he had his foot on this desk, and Izuku in his mind said, "Well, this just ruined my whole entire year." He walked to the back of the class to get a seat by the window. While Bakugo was trying to drown out Ida's nagging, he saw out of the corner of his eyes Izuku. He turned to get a better look and started getting angry. "So they let that damn weakling in here. Seems I'm gonna have to finally show him I'm better than him." But Katsuki's thoughts were interrupted by a loud bang on the teacher's desk. He looked up and saw someone standing there, and with their hands down on the table. And once he got everyone's attention, Aizawa spoke. "If you guys don't shut up in 2 seconds, I'm expelling every single one of you." Mineta shot back surprisingly and says, "Hey, you can't do that." And Aizawa's eyes turned red and stared down. He said, "You want to test that?" Mineta shook his head and sunk back into his seat and said, Aizawa continued, "So now that you're all quiet, put your PE uniforms on and meet me outside." Uraraka was thinking, don't we have assembly? But after seeing how he acted towards Mineta for speaking out of turn, she decided that's probably not the best idea to correct him. So everyone took their uniform from the wall and went to go change. In the changing room, Mineta was spazzing out. "Guys, don't you see right behind these walls? The girls are changing." And everyone just gave him a weird look like, "Come on, bruh. You're giving guys a bad rep." So they change and head out to the field. Once there, Aizawa says, "Today we'll be having a quirk apprehension test. You'll be doing a series of tests using your quirk." And hearing this, a lot of people, notably Uraraka, Jiro, Kaminari, they were all excited, and Aizawa was like, "Oh, you're excited? Nice. I hope you don't mind if, the person who comes in last gets expelled." And everyone shut up really quick because they know this guy is not joking. So Aizawa says, "I'll have the person with the most points in the exams demonstrate." And Bakugo was getting ready to go up because he was like, "Bro, I got 100 and something points, easy." And then Aizawa says, "Izuku, you're up." And Bakugo was saying in his mind, "How the hell did he get more than me?" And started gritting his teeth, trying to hold back his anger. Izuku walked up to Aizawa and hands him a ball. Aizawa hands him a ball and asks, "What's your farthest throw in middle school?" Izuku thought for a second and said, "Around 30 meters. And Aizawa said, "Okay, now use your quirk to aid you in throwing the ball as far as possible." So Izuku grabs the ball, and with an ability multiple people commented in the last part, so it was really popular, he increased the blood flow all around his body, simulating an adrenaline rush, but then focused it in the area which needed the boost of strength, his arms. So this amplified the effect, and Izuku threw the ball, and it had a lot of force behind it, flying through the air. Aizawa looked down at the tracker and it said 650 meters. Everyone was surprised, and Bakugo's anger grew more and more, but he knew he'll take this damn Deku down. So after this display, Aizawa brought the students to the other courses like long jump, sprinting, and side-to-side jumps, to name a few. And Izuku did above average in all of them, using his blood flow increase. Normally this move would render Izuku immobile after using it, but he specifically flowed it in certain parts of his body, and it wasn't on for very long, so Izuku managed to get through the entire thing. Exhausted, but finishing overall first place. Even though Bakugo and Uraraka scored higher in the ball throw, his overall score from all the events brought him up to number 1. And after hearing these results from Aizawa, Bakugo was furious. He marched over to Izuku and brought his hand back to set off an explosion in his face. But when he did, there was nothing, nothing came out, not even some smoke. Izuku smirked and Bakugo yelled, "What the hell are you smiling at?" And Izuku said, "Look behind you." And behind Bakugo was an angry Aizawa. His hair was floating and his eyes were red. "To the principal's office now." And Bakugo realized he still can't use his quirk, so he had nothing to fight with, so he just relented and went to the principal's office with Aizawa following behind him. So Aizawa told the class to change and meet him back at the class while he deals with this delinquent. As everyone is walking off, All Might appears from the corner of the wall. He was watching the entire thing, and he said in his mind, "That green-haired kid, what's his name again? Izuku? He sure has a lot of versatile quirk. It looks like he can even enhance his strength. Better tell Nezu." So All Might goes to see Principal Nezu in his office, and as he reaches to open the door, it opens itself, and an angry Bakugo storms out back to his class. All Might walked in and said he seemed angry, and Nezu had a defeated tone. Yes, he's quite the hot-headed type, so I have to be stricter with that one. All Might nods, knowing what that's like, and then has a conversation with Nezu about Izuku. Nothing really of note, like to mention. So back to class 1A, they had a few regular classes, math, English, the usual school stuff, and then the day ended. While Izuku and the rest of the class were leaving, he saw the blue-haired girl from earlier, so he decided to say what's up. She was walking with 2 other guys, which made Izuku kinda jealous, but he just wanted to be friends, or at least that's what he was telling himself, so he didn't feel bad. Izuku goes up to the 3 and says, "Hey Nejire," and she turned around and says, "Oh, Izuku, right?" And he says, "Yeah," and she says, "Yo, Mirio, Tamaki, this is the kid I was telling you about earlier." Mirio perked up and started shaking Izuku's hands violently, saying, "Nice to meet you," while Tamaki was just being Tamaki. He wanted to go home. So Izuku with the big 3, they walked to the train station all together, and they got to know each other well. So let's jump to the next day at school. Everyone is in class waiting for Aizawa when a huge man bursts through the door. "I am here." And All Might's voice caused almost everyone to start freaking out. Like, All Might is our teacher? No way! But he had to calm everyone down to explain today's test, the hero versus villains test. He instructed everyone to get their hero outfits and to meet him at training ground A. So everyone changes, and Izuku's outfit, his hero outfit, is similar to his canon outfit, but he had the color scheme of Scarlet on screen. Same mask also. What's cool about his outfit is that there's these hidden compartments all over his body containing blood he can use at any time. So Izuku and the rest of his class get to the observation area, and All Might starts to choose the teams at random, and the first round, the pairs are Bakugo and Ida versus Izuku and Uraraka. Uraraka heard the name Bakugo, and chills went up her spine. Like, all her interactions with him were always have been aggressive, but Izuku saw her worries and said, "Hey, don't worry about it. I beat Bakugo up every day when we were younger, so trust me, he's all bark, no bite." And this provided Uraraka with some relief, but she was still fearful. So Izuku and Uraraka had the same plan as canon. Izuku gets Bakugo's attention, and meanwhile Uraraka slips by to find the bomb room. So the 2 walk in and start going up the stairs. Let's switch perspective to Bakugo and Ida real quick. Bakugo was storming off to go get Izuku, but Ida said, "Watch out for the green-haired kid. He has some ability. He can freeze you in place. He used it on me and I could only move my eyes." And Bakugo took this with a grain of salt. I just realized I keep saying Bakugo, like the show Bakugo. I don't know. I just not pronouncing it right. Anyways, Bakugo took this with a grain of salt and ran off. So let's switch back to Izuku again. When they reached the 3rd floor, they could hear explosions coming their way, and Izuku immediately told Uraraka to be on the ready. They stood in silence as the explosions got closer and closer until the wall in front of them exploded. But when the smoke cleared, Bakugo only saw Izuku and, standing there by himself. Sparks started going off in his hands and he said, "So Deku, finally I get to show you your place, beneath me." And he ran at Izuku, thrusting his palm towards him, but his body froze. Right before he could set off an explosion, Bakugo's eyes stared at Deku in confusion. And Izuku said, "What, Katsuki? Cat got your tongue?" And he chuckled a bit. "I don't think I've ever used this one on you." And Bakugo's eyes were following Izuku as he continued to talk. "Well, since you're so proud of your explosions, let's you have a taste of your own medicine." Izuku twisted his fingers in the air, directing Bakugo's body, and he aimed his gauntlet right in the middle of his own chest. Bakugo started to get worried, and because his grenades were full with sweat, he couldn't move an inch, and Izuku said, "Bye-bye." And Bakugo pulled the pin of his own gauntlet, setting the explosion off right in the middle of his chest. Meanwhile, All Might was screaming at Izuku to stop, but he couldn't hear him, and Izuku moved up to meet with the Uraraka, leaving Bakugo unconscious with rubble on top of him. All Might thought of stopping the match, but he let it go on. Every time he sees Izuku fighting, he discovers something new about him, like this kid doesn't stop getting stronger. Izuku got to the 6th floor and Uraraka was crouching in front of the door to the bomb. She asked, what was that explosion? And Izuku said, don't worry about it, we need to focus on the bomb. She nodded and Izuku put phase 2 of his plan into motion. He put his hands against the door and blood from his suit started pouring underneath the door in the room. Ida on the other side, seeing this, became, he wasn't so more scared, he became concerned. Did someone get injured, because he heard a huge explosion earlier. So he ignored how gross it was and stepped into the blood to try and get to the door. But the first step he took, the blood was his last. He was stuck in the ground and he tried reciprocal bursting every one of his abilities, but it wouldn't budge. Then the door opened and Uraraka sprinted to the bomb. Ida tried and tried, but there was nothing he could do. And All Might's voice rang out, "Hero Team win." So as the announcement was made, robots went into the building to help Bakugo and bring him to the infirmary. Back in the observation room, All Might asked, "So class, who do you think was the MVP?" Most people said Uraraka, mainly because she followed plan and didn't almost kill someone, staring at Izuku. But unexpectedly, Momo stood up and said, "Well, All Might, I think the obvious MVP was Izuku. Due to his quirk, he was able to make someone use their own quirk against them. Yes, I do agree that it was reckless and he should have used the capture tape provided to restrain Bakugo. But we all know, he would throw a fit for not having a fair fight. Also, the restraining move with Ida was ingenious, luring him with the possibility that someone was seriously injured, and using that weakness to give Uraraka the means to touch the bomb was an MVP move." And she sat down. Everyone was quiet because they couldn't really argue, she brought up valid points. So, the MVP was Izuku. Let's switch perspective to Bakugo. He jumped awake in the infirmary and he began to look around to see, where he was, but Recovery Girl came over and said, No, you need to rest. And she laid him back down. He tried asking questions like where he was and, why he was here, but as he did, the memories hit him he could remember it. He could remember how he couldn't move and he could remember the explosion going off in his chest. And he looked down and bandages were covering his entire his torso. But he wasn't too badly injured. To be honest, he would have 100% died. But let's say Izuku, he has a bit of resistance to his own explosion. Why not? We don't need Izuku being a killer yet. So after that day, it was a weekend and not much happened over it. But Izuku kept conversing with Nejire over text and he was being a bit flirtatious, with her dropping subtle hints, and she shared the same sentiments, sending goodnight kisses and them having late night FaceTime calls. I guess in their universe it's called the iPair or some knockoff iPhone. So on Saturday night, Inko was called down to the dining room for a talk. Not Inko, oh my god. Izuku was called down to the dining room for a talk. He came downstairs expecting a casual conversation, but when he came down, Inko was at the dining room table with only one light on over her head. She said, "Take a seat." And Izuku hesitantly did so and asked, "Is something wrong?" And she said, No, I just need to tell you something. I should have told you this a long time ago." And Izuku was all ears. So Inko said, "Izuku, you may have been wondering how you end up with a waterbending quirk when I have telekinesis and your father has flames." Izuku said, "Yeah, you told me, remember? You said your grandfather had water manipulation, so it came to me." And Inko looked down and said, "That was a lie. Actually, Hisashi isn't your real father. I just made him up to hide the truth." Izuku was shocked but had no words. She said, actually, your father is Sekijiro-kan, or you may know him as Bad King. Izuku was shocked, like why would she even lie about that? But Inko explained, like all saying that, they knew each other for a long time and they hooked up but didn't use protection. And he had a hero career, so he didn't want to associate that with us, or like that could mean danger for them because villains who have a personal grudge with him could come after them. Inko started crying for lying to Izuku for years, but he understood and they hugged it out. Fast forward to the next day at school, and Aizawa announced to the class that they were going to be doing rescue training at the USJ. Everyone was excited because most of them thought they made like the Universal Studios of Japan, but all the confusion was cleared up by Aizawa, and everyone, they were excited, and Izuku realized something. He developed this recently, but he can sense someone's blood flow. Normally he doesn't notice because everyone's is relatively the same, but someone in the class, their blood flow was moving really fast, then slow, then fast, then slow again, showing that they were nervous but trying to calm down. Izuku can't pinpoint who it was, but it was a bit suspicious. Anyways, the class loads up, and on their way to the USJ, people are asking each other questions about their quirks, and Sue eventually asks Izuku about his, and he doesn't go into much detail, saying it's just has to do with water stuff. And Sue said, really, water stuff? And Izuku shrugged and said, yeah, pretty much. No one's buying it, obviously, but they don't have time to press him because they were there. Aizawa gets everyone off the bus and escorts them to meet the Hero 13. She does her whole speech about people with people should be conscious about using their quirks because it might actually end up hurting someone. And while in the middle of her speech, Kirishima said, "Whoa, sensei, I thought you said that we were doing rescue training, not fighting villains as well." And Aizawa was confused until he looked down the stairs and he saw a horde of villains coming towards them, twice as many as Canon, and they were more coordinating, rushing the entrance. Aizawa goes to the main entrance, but it was closed shut. Everyone started freaking out, but the more level-headed students started to think of a plan. But Izuku saw this as a training session. He went to the stairs and the villains were still shouting and rushing up, but he closed his eyes and everyone was wondering what he was doing. Then he quickly opened his eyes and brought his hand out like he was going to get a big hug, and the villains below him were all dead. The blood inside their body created spikes and ripped through them from the inside out, creating human spike balls. Some of the students vomited from the sight, and Aizawa thought, how could this kid do that? So we left off with Deku absolutely massacring a group of villains in the USJ. The sight was so bloody, some students couldn't stomach it. Seeing this, using his 10 brain cells, Shigaraki thinks it's best that he should leave, so Kurogiri teleports them back to the hideout. Back with everyone, Aizawa calls Nezu and tells him what happened and to send more pros, but not to make it a big scene. They're trying to keep it on the down low. So Nezu sends the same group of heroes as last time, including All Might. They get the police involved and have to clear up the bodies, quote unquote. And I put it in quotes because it's not really bodies, because all the limbs are scattered all over the place. Heads over there, arms over there, just gruesome. But Izuku didn't care. It was what had to be done. After Aizawa explained the situation and All Might looked at the dead villains, he wanted to reprimand Izuku, but those are some tough decisions to make that pros have to go through every day, and this kid is making them without any regrets. He'll work well under pressure, so All Might just works with the police to get all the students home. When Izuku arrives at his house, All Might gets out with him and hands him a piece of paper before going back into the car. Izuku went inside and Inko asked how his day was, and he just said nothing special and went up to his room. He sat on his bed and opened the note All Might gave him and read it. Young Midoriya, we need to talk. Meet me at Dagobah Beach tomorrow evening. Signed, All Might. Izuku wasn't too interested and thought he would just be cursing him out, so he just crumpled the paper and threw it into the trash can. So because of this whole situation, Nezu temporarily closed down UA, and the press did pry and asked why they were doing this, but Nezu just said it was a simple health inspection and they bought it. So the next day, Izuku was at home by himself, mainly keeping up with his training by levitating water around and messaging Nejire now and then. When it was around the evening, Izuku saw the time on his phone and remembered the note All Might gave him. Izuku didn't want to go, but he had nothing better to do. So while his mom was out, Izuku left the house to head to Dagobah Beach. Once he arrived, he saw this scrawny man standing by the coastline, and he looked around for All Might and said, "Wow, so he invited me, yet he is late." Meanwhile, All Might is looking out to the ocean, thinking about his old master and what she would do. But he heard some footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw Izuku looking around and thought like, oh, he doesn't recognize me in this form. So All Might walked up to Izuku and said, "So, you made it." Izuku was confused and asked, "Who are you exactly?" And All Might laughed and said, "Yeah, so you probably don't know me in this form." And he transformed into his buff form. Izuku was confused, but All Might explained his powers to him and how, after a fight with a villain named All For One, he got injured and can't sustain his form for long. Now it all started to make sense to Izuku, all those reports of All Might's active hero time getting shorter and shorter. Izuku said, "So why tell me all this?" And All Might said, "Because I want to pass my power on to you." Izuku didn't know what to think, to be receiving the power of All Might. Well, no matter what, he's sure as hell not gonna say no. So All Might plucks out a strand of hair and says, "Eat this." Izuku was a bit weirded out but ate it anyways, and All Might said he should wait for it to take effect. It should, come in by tomorrow. So Izuku goes home, and the week that UA is closed for, Izuku trains a bit with All Might to harness 20% of One For All, which is pretty incredible because Izuku had been training a lot beforehand, so that's how much he could use. So back to UA, Izuku enters his class and people there are giving him these weird vibes. People would look at him and as soon as they make eye contact, they would just snap back. Even when he sat down, Jiro, who sat in front of him, would scoot her desk away a bit. They were all scared of Izuku, or I should say what Izuku could do. If he killed villains so easily with zero remorse, imagine what would happen if they got on his bad side. So Aizawa enters class and everyone was already quiet, so he was pretty impressed. He then said, "In 1 week time, you will all be participating in the sports festival, where you get a chance to show off all what you've learned at UA to hopefully get an internship with a pro." Everyone was actually excited because they trained really hard. So time skipped to the sports festival. During this time, Izuku just worked with One For All and realized that not only does it give him All Might's abilities, but it can boost his own quirk as well. So imagine Aang and Korra in the Avatar state using waterbending. That would be Izuku using his quirk with All For One. So all the classes line up and Midnight calls up the class rep, Izuku Midoriya. He walks up to the pedestal and simply says, "I'm gonna win," and hands the mic back to Midnight. Like canon with Bakugo, students were mad, but members of Class 1A stayed quiet because they don't want to get on Izuku's bad side. So, on the first round, the race. With a countdown from Present Mike, the gates opened immediately and Todoroki froze the ground and ran out, but Izuku doesn't get trapped. The ice goes around him and he activates One For All in his legs and rushes off, passing Todoroki quickly. People were blown back by the jump and Bakugo was confused. Was he hiding this power from him this whole time? Izuku made it to the canyon and where he just used ice to slide across, while Todoroki and Bakugo were fighting for second and about to encounter the massive robot. Izuku was still way in the lead and now at the minefield. Since he was so far ahead, there was really no rush, so he made sure to dodge all the mines so that it's intact for all the rest of the people when they come across. And he made it to the finish line. 10 minutes later, Bakugo and Todoroki were running through the tunnel, but first to make it was Todoroki getting second, and all the other students followed soon behind. So next was the cavalry battle. While picking teams, Izuku was completely excluded from all of them. So he asked Midnight and she asked Nezu if he could be on a team by himself, and he said yes, it would be more interesting. So Deku was going about it alone. So the match started and immediately people started rushing Deku. Once they get close, he activates One For All and uses his blood bending to stop everyone in their place. Completely frozen, Present Mike was over the intercom saying, "It seems Izuku Midoriya just stopped everyone. What incredible power!" So Izuku walked off, and once he was a good distance away, he unfroze everyone. Now they knew not to go towards him, but still people did and again were frozen. Eventually they learned, but some tried charging full speed, but it didn't work, and soon the time ran out, meaning Izuku came first in the race and the cavalry battle. So they got a short half-an-hour break, and while walking to the cafeteria, Izuku bumped into a pro hero. Not Endeavor, but Vlad King. They both stared each other down, and Vlad King just knew that he knew he was his dad. Vlad King was getting ready to apologize, but Izuku embraced him in a hug. Vlad King was shocked and asked, "Aren't you mad at me?" Izuku nodded no, saying, "You cared enough about me and my mom that you left us so we could be safe." Once they let go, Izuku did punch him, saying he could have at least told him himself, and Vlad King just rubbed the back of his head nervously. So they talked for a bit, and soon it was time for Izuku's 1v1 matches. Vlad King wished his son good luck and he was off. The first matchup was Izuku versus Shinso. In this, Ojiro didn't tell Izuku any advice, so he is going in blind. Izuku walked up to the stage and immediately Shinso started going off about how lucky he was to have such a strong quirk, but Izuku didn't really care and he was just getting annoyed by Shinso. He just wanted to knock him out as quickly as possible. Midnight started the match, and before Shinso could start talking again, Izuku used blood bending and had him walk out of the ring by controlling his blood. The entire time Shinso was wondering what was going on, but he had no control of his movements and he walked right out. People were confused why he did this, but they just thought it was some part of Izuku's abilities, because if he can freeze people, then maybe he could control them as well. So in the stands, Nejire was also watching and she was just impressed by Izuku's vast arsenal of abilities. The matches in between go the same as canon, and it was time for Izuku versus Shoto Todoroki. As the match starts, Todoroki tries overwhelming Izuku with huge ice glaciers, but Izuku has incredible control over water in all of its forms. So as the spikes shoot towards Izuku, they just evaporate in front of him. He sublimed the ice, turning it from straight ice to water vapor. So Todoroki tries over and over, but eventually starts to freeze over, giving Izuku his opening. Using One For All at 15%, Izuku sent it throughout his body and jumped towards Todoroki. He was too slow from the cold to be able to dodge, and Izuku punched him across the face, sending him out of the ring. The crowd cheered because they haven't seen this much power from a hero student in a long time. So again, nothing changes with the background fights. I'm not covering them because they're not that all important. So the finals, Bakugo versus Izuku. The matches start and Bakugo says, "You don't know how long I've been waiting for this, to knock you down a peg." and his hand started to create sparks, and full explosions kept shooting out of his palms, and like a rocket, he shot towards Izuku. Izuku dodged the attack, and when Bakugo came around to try again, Izuku activated One for All and his blood bending. Bakugo's eyes were shooting around trying to figure out what's happening, and Izuku then said, "You know, Bakugo, I don't think you've ever gotten a taste of your own medicine." So Izuku aimed both his palms to his chest and released the control, and because before he was frozen he was launching explosions, so he continued and set off multiple explosions in his chest. Bakugo, beaten, still wasn't going to give up. He tried getting up, but Izuku kicked him in the stomach and he rolled over. Then Midnight called the match, announcing Izuku the winner because Bakugo was immobilized. He was taken to the infirmary, but still the medal ceremony was still happening. Izuku came first, second was Bakugo, and third was the same two-way tie between Ida and Tokoyami. Of course, Bakugo, as I said, was still in Recovery Girl's room, so he couldn't attend to get his second place medal. Elsewhere, in the villain hideout, Shigaraki reported to One for All saying, "Izuku, he killed everyone." One for All repeated, he killed everyone? That kid? Shigaraki nodded and One for All gritted his teeth. He had plans for all of them, but it was all ruined by a kid. He then said, "Shigaraki, keep your head up. You'll be able to get your revenge right now." As the medal ceremony is on the way, from the center of the arena, a black portal opens up. Everyone from the USJ immediately knew what this was. They all went on the offensive, and from the portal stepped out All for One and Shigaraki, and finally Kurogiri. Aizawa was the first hero to the front lines, and he immediately cancelled the Portuguese quirk because he saw how deadly it could be. Shigaraki smiled and said, "So you can only cancel one person's quirk at a time? Good." And he lunged at Aizawa, but was stopped mid-air. Shigaraki's eyes were moving around trying to see what was happening, and his eyes met with Izuku, and he became mad. This kid again? But he couldn't do anything. All for One saw this ability and said, "Quite an interesting quirk, kid. I hope you don't mind if you give it to me." All for One rushed Izuku, but like his pupil, All for One didn't learn. He was frozen in place, and Izuku turned to All Might and said, "He's all yours." All Might smiled and said under his breath, "Thank you." All Might walked up to All for One and started saying a speech. "To the one that took away my master, the one that killed and stole from so many, and the one that dare lay a finger on my students, I condemn thee to hell." Using a United States of Smash, All Might punched All for One right in the face, sending him flying through the arena walls and knocking him out. Soon the SWAT team was called, and they restrained Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and All for One, who surprisingly didn't die. When Izuku got a second to rest, Nejire came down from the stands and she asked if he was okay. Izuku said, "Yeah, there's nothing to worry about." And Nejire said, "Are you sure? Like, I was really worried." He said, "Yeah, don't what?" But before he could finish, Nejire kissed him. Izuku went with it, but when she pulled away, he asked, "What was that for?" And Nejire admitted that she had feelings for him, and after seeing villains infiltrate the school so easily, and how they could have actually died, she doesn't want to have regrets if the worst was supposed to happen. And Izuku then said he had the same feelings for her. And the two leaned in to kiss again, but All Might said, "At the awards, Izuku." And he said, "Oh, yeah, sorry, All Might." So Izuku got his gold medal for first, and to be honest, without Shigaraki and All for One, things are pretty peaceful. Eventually, the Nomos are found and all captured along with Dr. Ijiko. and all other non-League of villains are defeated, like Stain for instance. And of course Eri is saved. So that is where I'm going to be leaving this one off. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end of the video. If you liked it, like, and if you like my content in general, consider subscribing. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next What If.